The world went silent. 43-year-old Wren Calloway pressed her cheek against the cold stock of the Barrett M107. The rifle weighed 30 pounds. She felt every ounce of it, felt it pressing into her shoulder like a hand trying to push her backward through time. Through the scope, 2,400 yards downrange, a steel target shimmered in the Virginia heat. At that distance, it looked smaller than her thumbnail held at arm's length. A speck, an abstraction, something that existed more as math than matter. Wind flags along the range told conflicting stories. Gusting east, then southeast, then back again. 12 miles per hour, maybe 15. The kind of conditions that made even experienced shooters pack up their gear, shake their heads and drive home, telling themselves tomorrow would be better. Temperature had dropped 3 degrees in the last 10 minutes as storm clouds gathered along the horizon like an advancing army. That changed air density, changed the way molecules moved, changed everything. Her finger rested beside the trigger. Not on it. Not yet. Behind her, 30 Navy SEALs stood in absolute silence. Some peered through their own spotting scopes, tracking the distant target with professional intensity. Others held phone cameras recording, all of them waiting to see if the impossible was about to happen, or if this unknown woman was about to embarrass herself in front of the most elite shooting community in America. Thane Kelford stood closest. 46 years old, built like a man carved from granite and bad decisions. Arms crossed over a chest that could have been a wall. Salt and pepper hair cut military short. Scars on his forearms that told stories he would never put into words. The current record holder at 2,380 yards, a shot he had made in Kandahar in the summer of 2014. One round. One Taliban commander who thought a ridgeline made him invisible. One kill that entered SEAL legend and stayed there for a decade. He had been certain she would fail. Absolutely certain. Right up until her first 2 shots. 1,000 yards. Dead center. Twice. 1,500 yards. Perfect again. The crowd had stopped whispering after that one. Now this. The shot that would either break his decade-long record or prove those earlier hits were the kind of luck that visits once and never returns. He watched her through narrowed eyes, arms still crossed, jaw set like concrete. Wren watched the flags, timing the gusts, looking for the pattern her father had taught her to find in every system, in every chaos, in every moment that seemed random, but never truly was. Everything had a rhythm. Wind, weather, heartbeats, fear. You just had to be patient enough to hear it. She remembered his voice. Low, steady. The voice of a man who never raised it because he never needed to. Feel it first, Wren. The wind on your skin. The temperature. Your breath. The rifle is just a tool. You are the guidance system. You are what makes the difference. The wind flags relaxed. Not still. Never still. But steady enough. A window measured in seconds. Maybe 5. Maybe less. She moved her finger onto the trigger. Started her exhale. Found the stillness at the bottom of her breath where the body achieved a kind of temporary perfection. Everything aligned. Everything quiet. And squeezed. The Barrett roared. 50 caliber fury compressed into a fraction of a second. The suppressor tamed the blast, but nothing on earth could hide the concussive force that rippled across the range like a shockwave from a detonation. The ground trembled. The air split apart and crashed back together. Wren rode the recoil. Returned to the scope. Steady hands. Steady eyes. The bullet would be in flight for nearly 4 seconds. 4 seconds of wondering if she had read the wind correctly. If her calculations were right. If 5 years away from any range, any rifle, any reminder of who she used to be, had dulled her edge past recovery. 4 seconds that felt like the longest silence she had ever endured. Then the sound reached them. A clear, unmistakable clang. Metal striking metal. The tone that meant center mass. The tone that meant the distance had been conquered. The tone that meant everything was about to change. The range exploded into chaos. SEALs shouting. Someone threw a hat into the air. Phone cameras swiveling to capture her face, her position, the impossible thing that had just happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Virginia. Thane Kelford stood frozen, his expression cycling through disbelief, then shock, then something that might have been respect trying to push through a decade of pride. He walked over slowly, extended his hand. "Who the hell are you?" Wren stood, 5'5" in boots, auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail that had come loose on one side, wearing her father's old field jacket that still smelled like gun oil and pipe tobacco. A jacket 2 sizes too large that made her look even smaller than she was. She shook his hand with a grip that surprised him. Wren Calloway. My father was Colonel Brennan Calloway. They called him Spectre. The color drained from Thane's face. She watched it happen. Watched the blood retreat like someone had opened a valve at the base of his skull. You're Spectre's kid, I'm Spectre's daughter. 48 hours earlier, Wren's biggest problem had been making rent. The Anchor Bar sat 3 blocks from the Naval Special Warfare compound in Virginia Beach. The kind of establishment where the floor was permanently sticky, the beer was cheap enough to drink by the pitcher, and nobody asked questions they did not want answered. Neon signs buzzed in windows that had not been properly cleaned since the previous administration. The jukebox played country songs about trucks and heartbreak on an endless loop that had become the soundtrack of Wren's Friday nights. She had been working there for 6 months. Her third job, on top of teaching American history at Richmond High School 5 days a week, and weekend tutoring sessions for kids whose parents could afford $20 an hour. The math was brutal and unforgiving. 3 jobs barely covered a 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood where gunshots were occasional enough to ignore but frequent enough to notice. Juniper's expenses, school supplies, the winter coat she needed, the field trip deposit that was due next Friday, college savings, retirement. Those were luxuries for people who did not live paycheck to paycheck. People who had not spent the last 5 years learning that dignity and poverty could coexist but never comfortably. Wren wiped down the same section of bar for the 3rd time. 11:15 on a Friday night. Her shift had started at 4. Her feet ached with the deep bone pain of 9 hours on concrete. Her back ached. 43 felt like 63 after standing that long. She had stopped checking the clock hours ago because watching time move slowly was worse than not knowing what time it was. The crowd was thick with SEALs, fresh off deployment, still carrying the tension of wherever they had been in their shoulders and their eyes and the way they drank, like men trying to forget things that soap and water could not wash away. Their laughter was too loud. Their silences were too deep. They ordered rounds and left decent tips and never looked at the bartender long enough to see a person. Thane Kelford held court at the corner table. She had seen him before. Hard to miss. 6'2", broad-shouldered with the kind of scars that came from doing things most people only saw in movies. His voice carried across the room with the easy confidence of someone who had earned every syllable and knew it. 2380, he was saying. Kandahar. Summer of 14. Temperature was 115 in the shade and there was no shade. Wind gusting to 20. I had to account for heat shimmer mirage the whole thing. Conditions that would have made most shooters stand down and call it a day. He paused. Took a drink. Let the moment build the way a man does when he has told a story many times and knows exactly where the silences should land. Headshot on a Taliban commander who thought he was safe behind a ridgeline. 1 shot, 1 kill. Still unbeaten in SEAL history. 10 years and counting. His table erupted in approval, glasses raised. Someone called him Reaper. Someone else said something about shooting that only God could match. The words were meant as compliment received as confirmation. Thane smiled the smile of a man who had long ago stopped distinguishing between confidence and identity. Wren felt the words bubble up before she could stop them, before the sensible part of her brain could clamp down on the reckless part, before the single mother with 3 jobs who could not afford to alienate paying customers could overrule the daughter of a man who had done things these operators would never know about. My father shot farther. The table went quiet. Then every head turned. Slowly, the way heads turn when something unexpected enters a room where unexpected things are not welcome. Thane's eyes found her, narrowed slightly, the way a predator's eyes narrow when it spots movement in grass. Say again, sweetheart. The endearment landed like a slap, deliberate, designed to put her in her place, to remind her that she was behind the bar, that she poured drinks, that she smelled like beer and cleaning solution and exhaustion, and had no business inserting herself into conversations between men who had done things she could not imagine. Wren set down her rag. Every instinct screamed at her to back down, apologize, laugh it off, go back to being invisible. A single mom with tired eyes and a ponytail and 3 jobs that still were not enough. A woman who could not afford to lose even the mediocre tips this crowd provided. But something else rose up. Something deeper than instinct. Something that sounded exactly like her father's voice from 15 years ago. A voice she had tried to forget. A voice she had failed to forget. Don't ever let them make you small, Ren. Not for anyone, not for any reason. You stand full height or you don't stand at all. She spoke louder, clearer. The way he had taught her to speak when speaking mattered. My father, 20 yards, Afghanistan, Operation Anaconda. March 2002. The entire bar went silent. 30-some veterans and operators staring at the bartender with the tired eyes and the ponytail. The woman who smelled like spilled beer and industrial cleaner, and who definitely did not look like someone who knew the first thing about precision shooting, or war, or the world beyond this sticky-floored bar where she poured cheap drinks for men who had seen the worst of humanity and come home carrying it like luggage they could never set down. Thane stood, slowly, unfolding from his chair with the deliberate slowness of a man who wants you to understand his size before he speaks. He walked to the bar, leaned against it, placed both hands flat on the surface, and looked at her with eyes that had watched men die and had learned nothing soft from the experience. Little lady, do you even know what 2,500 yards looks like? That is over a mile. That is farther than most people can see clearly without magnification. That is a distance where the bullet is in the air long enough to have a conversation with God before it arrives. I know exactly what it looks like. And who was this father of yours, Mr. 2520 Colonel Brennan Calloway? Rangers, then Special Forces. Call sign Spectre. The reaction was immediate. Not from Thane. From behind him. One of the older SEALs. A man in his 50s with gray hair and deep-set eyes that looked like they had been staring into bright light for decades. He let out a low whistle that cut through the silence like a blade. Spectre Calloway. Jesus Christ, I thought that was a ghost story. He was real. Ren held the old man's gaze. And everything they say about him is true. Thane studied her face, looking for tells, looking for the lie. The micro-expressions that would reveal she was making this up, that she had overheard the name somewhere and was using it for attention or free drinks or whatever it was that women in bars wanted from men like him. His expression shifted when he did not find what he was looking for. Spectre Calloway was your old man. Yes. And he taught you to shoot, from age 12 until he died 5 years ago. Thane pulled back slightly, reassessing, recalculating the way a man does when the equations he was confident about suddenly produce different answers. Prove it. He gestured around the bar. At the faces, at the phones already recording, tomorrow morning. 0800, Virginia Beach Long Range Precision Complex. You make one clean shot at 1,000 yards in front of witnesses. Just one. And I will apologize personally, sincerely, and buy you the nicest dinner in Virginia Beach. He paused, smiled, the kind of smile that did not reach his eyes, the kind that was not really a smile at all. But if you can actually break my record, 2,400 yards or better, I will give you $50,000 cash, and I will buy this whole bar, make you a business owner instead of an employee. The offer hung in the air like smoke. $50,000. More than Ren made in a year from all 3 jobs combined. Enough to fix the transmission in her Honda that had been grinding for months. Enough to buy Juniper's textbooks for college without taking out loans that would follow them both into middle age. Enough to breathe for the first time in 5 years. But it also meant shooting. In front of professionals who would know immediately if she was full of it. Shooting after 5 years of deliberately staying away from ranges and rifles and anything that reminded her of who she used to be. 5 years of trying to forget Afghanistan and friendly fire and the things that still woke her up at 3 a.m. with her heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. Thane extended his hand across the bar. What do you say Ren thought about the metal box in her father's cabin? The one hidden under the 3rd floorboard from the left wall. The one she had been too afraid to face since his funeral. The letter inside that started with 2 words she had never been brave enough to read past. When you're ready. Maybe she was ready. Maybe ready was not something you felt. Maybe it was something you decided. Deal. His handshake was firm and calloused, the grip of someone who had spent decades doing hard things with his hands. 0800. Don't be late. The drive to West Virginia took 4 hours. Wren left Virginia Beach just after midnight, her Honda Civic coughing and rattling over back roads that wound into the Blue Ridge Mountains like veins into a body. The headlights carved tunnels through darkness so complete it felt like the world had been erased on either side of the road. Only what the lights touched existed. Everything else was memory and imagination and the sound of an engine that might give out at any moment. The cabin sat in a hollow surrounded by oak and pine, isolated, accessible only by a gravel road that turned to mud when it rained and to ice when it froze. She had not been back since the funeral. 5 years of avoidance. 5 years of pretending that not thinking about something made it disappear. 5 years of being wrong about almost everything. Her headlights caught the structure at 2 a.m, small. Single story. Dark windows like closed eyes. The workshop beside it leaned slightly, its door hanging open, creaking in the wind with the sound of something tired and waiting. Wren killed the engine, sat in the silence. Mountain sounds filled the void. Crickets, an owl somewhere distant calling for something that might not answer. Wind moving through branches with a sound like breathing, like the mountain itself was alive and watching her and wondering why she had stayed away so long. She forced herself out of the car. The night air hit her like cold water, pine and earth and the faint mineral smell of the creek that ran behind the property. Smells she had grown up with, smells she had run from, smells that meant home in a language deeper than words. The front door key was under the third stone on the left side of the porch, exactly where it had always been. Her father never changed it, never saw the point. Anyone smart enough to find this cabin, he used to say, was either welcome or too dangerous for a locked door to stop. The lock resisted, then yielded with a click that sounded like surrender. Inside, the smell hit first. Dust. Old wood. The ghost of pipe tobacco lingering in curtains and cushions like a spirit that refused to move on. Her father used to smoke on winter evenings while reading Jack London, telling her stories about mountains and survival and what it meant to be strong when everything around you tried to make you weak. She could see him in the chair by the window, the way his hands held the pipe, the way the smoke curled upward and disappeared into light from the reading lamp. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Furniture under sheets, kitchen frozen in time, a coffee cup in the sink from the morning he died, his reading chair by the window, books still open on the side table. Call of the Wild. He had been reading it the week his heart supposedly gave out. Supposedly. That word had lived inside her for 5 years. Quiet, persistent, a splinter she could feel but never extract. Wren moved through the darkness by memory, through the kitchen where he had taught her to clean rifles when she was 12, her small hands learning the mechanics of precision, while he explained that taking care of your tools was the same as taking care of yourself. Past the bedroom that had been hers from 19 to 24, when her world had collapsed, and he had rebuilt it piece by piece with patience and silence, and the understanding that some things healed only if you did not rush them. Down the stairs to the basement. Brennan Calloway had built a 100-foot shooting range down here. Reinforced concrete walls, professional ventilation that hummed to life when she flipped the switch, target system at one end, shooting bench and gun safe at the other. The safe opened to the combination he had made her memorize when she was 13. His service number followed by hers. 8 digits that unlocked everything he owned and everything he was. The rifles were still there, pristine, oiled, maintained in their abandonment like he had known someone would return eventually, like he had prepared for this moment with the same methodical patience he brought to everything. An M48 A5, a custom Remington 700 with the stock he had carved from walnut. Himself, the grain smooth under her fingers, shaped to fit a shoulder, shaped to feel like an extension of the body rather than an attachment to it. A Chaytak intervention, and beside them dozens of spiral-bound notebooks filled with his handwriting. Wind calculations, elevation tables, ballistic coefficients. 50 years of learning compressed into paper and ink. A loose page fell out when she opened one of the notebooks, her name at the top. Crossed out once, started again. The handwriting of a man choosing his words with the same precision he brought to everything else. Wren. If you are reading this, you finally came back. Good. That means you are ready. Remember what I taught you. Shooting is not about the gun. It is about understanding invisible forces. Wind, gravity, time, distance, the space between intention and result. You are better than I ever was. Do not let anyone tell you different, especially yourself. The boxes under the workbench. Third floorboard from the left wall. You will know what to do. Love always, Dad. Her hands shook as she read it. Then read it again. The words blurring and sharpening as tears she had forbidden for 5 years finally broke through whatever wall she had built to hold them back. She had not cried at his funeral, had not cried when the medical examiner said cardiac arrest was common in men his age, delivering the news with the practiced detachment of someone who said these things every day. Had not cried when she sold his truck and closed his bank accounts and pretended that efficiency was the same as strength. She cried now, alone in a basement at 2 a.m, her father's handwriting trembling in her hands. She cried for the man who had raised her after her mother left when Ren was 9, who had taught her to shoot and think and stand tall and refuse to be diminished by anyone or anything. For the years she had wasted being scared, for the conversations they would never have, for the questions she had been too afraid to ask when asking might have mattered. When the tears stopped, she stood, walked to the workbench. Third floorboard from the left wall lifted easily, like it had been designed to be lifted because it had. Underneath was a metal box wrapped in oilcloth, military grade, waterproof, locked with a combination she did not yet know. She did not open it. Not yet. First, she had to prove she deserved to. She carried it upstairs and placed it in the Honda's trunk. Whatever was inside it was going with her. But before tomorrow, she needed to know if 5 years away had destroyed what her father built, or if it was still in there, somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the grief and the deliberate forgetting. Ren loaded the Remington 700, set up a target at 50 yards. Should have been simple. Should have been like breathing. First shot, 4 inches left. The miss was loud in the concrete room. Second shot, 3 inches high. Worse, rust. 5 years of rust and deliberate forgetting. 5 years of telling herself she did not need this, did not want this, that this part of her life was over. She forced herself to slow down, close her eyes, remember the fundamentals the way her father had drilled them into her thousands of times until they were not lessons anymore, but reflexes. Breathing, slow, deliberate. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Let the exhale carry the tension out of your shoulders, your arms, your hands. Trigger control. Not pulling, squeezing. A gradual increase of pressure so smooth that the break surprises you. If you know the exact moment the rifle will fire, you are doing it wrong. Follow through. Stay on the scope after the shot. Watch where it lands. Learn from it. Every miss is information. Every hit is confirmation of information correctly applied. By the 20th round, she was grouping within 2 inches. By the 50th, her groups were tight enough to cover with a quarter. But 50 yards was not 1,500. Was not 2,400. Tomorrow she would find out if muscle memory was enough, or if she had just made a promise she could not keep to a man who would never let her forget it. She cleaned the rifle, replaced it in the safe, climbed the stairs, sat in her father's chair, and did not sleep. Just sat in the dark with the smell of pipe tobacco and old books, listening to the mountain breathe, and waited for dawn. The Virginia Beach Long Range Precision Complex opened at 0700. Ren arrived at 0730, wearing jeans boots and her father's field jacket. The jacket still carried his smell. Gun oil, pine, the menthol rub he used on joints that remembered too many parachute jumps and helicopter insertions and hard landings in places the maps did not name. She had almost left it in the car, almost decided it was sentimental and impractical and would make her look like she was playing dress-up in a dead man's clothes. Then she put it on. Because it was not a costume. It was armor. The range sprawled across 300 acres of Virginia flatland, multiple buildings. Berms and target stands stretching from 100 yards to 3,000. The kind of facility where SEALs and Marines and FBI snipers came to push the boundaries of what a human being could do with a rifle and a scope and enough knowledge to bend physics in their favor. Thane's truck was already there. So were 6 others. Word had spread. The bartender from the Anchor who claimed Spectre Calloway was her father. This was entertainment, a story they would tell for years. The day reality humbled someone who had confused overheard war stories with actual skill. Ren walked toward the main building. Her stomach tried to escape through her throat with every step, every footfall a reminder of how insane this was. She was a high school history teacher, had not competed in 5 years, had not touched a rifle until 4 hours ago, was about to try to outshoot a Navy SEAL in front of the most elite shooting community in America. Her father's voice again. Quiet, steady, as real as if he were walking beside her. Fear is just information, Ren. It tells you something matters. Listen to it, then do the thing anyway. Thane waited by the entrance with 3 other men. All of them had the look. Military bearing that was impossible to hide even in civilian clothes. The stillness of people who had learned to wait and watch and act without wasted motion. Scars visible on forearms and hands. Eyes that measured everything and found most things lacking. Didn't think you'd show. His tone had changed from last night. Less mocking, more curious. As if something about her decision to actually appear had shifted a calculation he had been running. I don't say things I don't mean. We'll see. Range is set up. Target at 1,000 yards to start. Hit that, we talk about going farther. He led her through the building and out to the firing positions. More people had gathered. 20, then 30, SEALs, Marines, veterans who had traded uniforms for civilian life, but kept the bearing and the silence and the way of standing that said they had seen things and survived things and were not easily impressed. One old man sat apart from the others, late 60s or early 70s. Face weathered by decades of wind and hard decisions in places where the wrong decision was the last one you made. He did not speak, did not move, just watched with eyes that carried the particular stillness of a man who had spent a lifetime in places where patience meant survival. Ren noticed him, filed him away. Something about the way he watched her felt different from the others. Not curiosity, recognition. The target stood at the far end of the range. Steel plate, 18 inches across. At 1,000 yards, it looked like a coin held at arm's length, small enough to seem impossible, large enough to be merely very difficult. Thane gestured to the shooting bench. An M48A6 lay there already set up. Nightforce ATACR scope, bipod, suppressor, professional equipment purchased with government money. Weather's decent, 68 degrees. Wind easterly at 7 to 9 miles per hour. Humidity, 65%. He pulled out a ballistic calculator, started entering numbers with practiced efficiency. Ever shoot past 500 yards? A few times. He looked up from the calculator. This isn't backyard plinking. At 1,000 yards, the bullet drops 30 feet. Wind can push it 6 feet left or right. You have to account for the rotation of the earth. Air density, temperature gradients, everything. He was trying to intimidate her. Or maybe help. Hard to tell with men like Thane. Sometimes the line between testing and teaching was invisible. Here. He held out the calculator. This will give you the corrections. Ren did not take it. Instead, she knelt behind the rifle, pressed her cheek to the stock, found the target through the scope. The image swam, then sharpened as she adjusted focus. Behind the target, grass rippled in waves that told stories about the wind if you knew how to read them. To the left, a flag snapped and relaxed and snapped again with each gust. She closed her eyes. Let her father's training take over. Not words this time. Something deeper. Muscle memory. Instinct. The knowledge that lived in her hands and her shoulders and her breathing. She opened her eyes. Watched the grass. The wind was consistent. Right to left. 7 miles per hour. Maybe 8. She timed the gusts and the lulls. Found the pattern. Everything had a pattern if you watched long enough. 1,000 yards. 8 mile per hour crosswind. 90-degree angle to her position. She calculated in her head. The way Brennan had taught her. No computer. No app. No technology between her and the physics. Just math and observation and the belief that understanding how things work gives you power over them. Bullet weight. Probably 175 grains based on the rifle. Muzzle velocity around 2,600 feet per second. Time of flight roughly 1.4 seconds. In that time, the wind would push the bullet approximately 7 inches. At this distance, that translated to roughly 2 minutes of angle. Elevation was simpler. She needed about 28 minutes of adjustment. The scope clicked in quarter-minute increments. 112 clicks up. She made each adjustment with deliberate precision. Each click audible. Each one a commitment. Each one a step closer to a moment she could not take back. Thane watched. His arms uncrossed now. Attention sharpened. You know what you're doing. My father taught me. Not with computers. With math and patience and the belief that understanding how things work gives you power over them. She settled into position. Rifle snug against her shoulder. Grip firm but relaxed. The contradiction that made shooting an art rather than a science. Hold tight enough to control. Loose enough to not interfere. She watched the grass. Waited for the pattern to repeat. Wind gusted. Relaxed. Gusted. Relaxed. On the next relaxation, she stopped her breath mid-exhale. Found the natural pause at the bottom of her breathing cycle. That fraction of a second where the body achieved perfect stillness. And squeezed. The rifle cracked. Suppressor muting it to a sharp bark. Recoil pushing into her shoulder. She wrote it. Returned to the scope. 1.4 seconds felt infinite. Time enough to doubt everything. Time enough to remember the things she had spent 5 years trying to forget. Time enough to wonder if this whole thing was a mistake born of pride and too many hours on her feet and the accumulated frustration of a life that had become smaller than she ever intended. Then the clang echoed across the range, clear. Unmistakable. The sound of metal finding metal at a distance that most people could not conceptualize. The crowd erupted. Someone whistled. Someone swore with what sounded like admiration. Thane stared through his spotting scope for a long moment. Lowered it. Looked at her differently now. Not a bartender anymore. A shooter. Dead center. Maybe 2 inches high. That is within minute of angle at 1,000 yards. Do it again. The words came out before she decided to say them. Not defiance. Confidence. She did. Same process. Same calculations running through her mind like equations she had internalized so deeply they were no longer conscious thought but instinct refined by repetition. Same trust in physics and training and a dead man's lessons. Clang. Thane's expression had gone from skeptical to something Ren could not quite name. Not quite respect. Not quite fear. Something between the two that lived in the space where certainty used to be. 1,500 yards. They moved to a different position. New target. The steel plate looked like a pinhead now, a speck, almost abstract. Something you had to believe existed rather than see clearly. Wind had picked up to 12 miles per hour. Temperature dropping as clouds continued their advance across the sky. Air density changing with every degree. Everything shifting. The world refusing to hold still long enough to be predicted with certainty. Ren ran the numbers. 1,500 yards meant longer flight time. More wind drift. More variables stacking on top of each other like cards in a house that could collapse from a single miscalculation. The Earth's rotation became significant at this distance. Coriolis effect would push the bullet approximately 3 inches right at this latitude shooting east. She adjusted, waited for the wind pattern, found her window, shot. 3 seconds of flight, long enough to second-guess every assumption, long enough to feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes on her back. Clang. The old man who had been sitting apart stood up, walked toward them with the careful gait of someone whose knees remembered too many hard landings. 70s. Lines carved deep into a face that had been shaped by decades of sun and wind and decisions made in places most people would never see. He stopped next to Thane, looked at Ren with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not threatening. Something else entirely. Something that felt like a man seeing someone he had been waiting a very long time to meet. She is right, Thane. She will not miss. Thane turned. Hawk, what the hell are you doing here? The old man did not answer, kept his eyes on Ren. Eyes that were wet at the edges, though his voice remained steady. Your father sent me, technically 5 years ago. I have been waiting for you to be ready. Ren Calloway. The range went quiet again. Different from before. Not anticipation this time. Revelation. Ren felt reality shift beneath her feet. The ground was still solid. The sky was still gray. But something fundamental had changed in the space between one sentence and the next. You knew my father, Sergeant Major Prosper Redmond. Served with Brennan for 20 years. Gulf War. Somalia. 3 tours Afghanistan. Places without names. Things that will never be in any history book. He smiled. But it was sad around the edges. The kind of smile that carried more grief than joy. He told me about you, showed pictures, said if anything ever happened to him, I should watch over you. Make sure you found your way back. Back to what? To this. Prosper gestured at the rifle. The range. The shot she had just made. The woman she was becoming again after 5 years of trying to be someone else. To who you really are. You are Spectre Calloway's daughter. This is in your blood. In your bones. In the way you breathe when you are behind a rifle. He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who understood that what he was about to say would change a life. He looked around at the crowd, at the phones recording, at the evidence spreading across social media with the speed and permanence of wildfire. But more than that, his eyes returned to hers, held them, would not let go. Your father did not die of a heart attack, Wren. The words fell like stones into deep water, sinking through layers of assumption and grief, and 5 years of accepting a story that had never felt true but had been easier to believe than the alternative. He was murdered. Prosper's voice did not waver, did not soften. He delivered the truth the way a surgeon delivers a cut. Clean, precise, necessary. And now that you just went viral, he gestured at the recording phones, at the faces illuminated by screens, at the digital trail leading from this range to every military forum and social media platform in America. They will come for you, too. Wren stood on the firing line with the wind pulling at her father's jacket and the weight of a dead man's secrets pressing down on her shoulders. Behind her, 30 phones recorded. Ahead of her, a target at 2,400 yards waited like a question she had not yet answered. And beside her, an old soldier with wet eyes told her the truth she had spent 5 years afraid to hear. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. Her father's death, her own safety, the reason he had written that letter and hidden that box and taught her every skill he possessed, with an urgency she had mistaken for love, but now understood, was preparation. He had been getting her ready, not for competition, not for sport, for this. The clouds gathered, the wind shifted, and somewhere in the distance, the people who had killed her father were about to learn that his daughter could shoot, and that she was no longer hiding. The house sat at the end of a dirt road that did not appear on any map Wren had ever seen, 30 miles west of Virginia Beach. Deep enough into rural Virginia that cell service became a memory, and the trees pressed close enough to the road to scrape the truck's mirrors on both sides. Prosper Redmond drove with the calm efficiency of a man who had made this drive 1,000 times in darkness. His hands on the wheel were steady, scarred, the knuckles swollen with age and old fractures that had healed without medical attention, because medical attention meant questions, and questions meant paperwork, and paperwork meant someone somewhere would know where you were. Thane sat in the passenger seat. He had not spoken since they left the range. His jaw worked occasionally, muscle jumping beneath skin, the only visible sign of whatever was happening behind his eyes. A man processing information that contradicted a decade of assumptions. Wren sat in the back, her father's jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. The metal box from the cabin sat on the seat beside her. She had not opened it, had carried it from her Honda's trunk to Prosper's truck, without explanation, operating on instinct she did not fully understand. Some part of her knew she would need it, the same part that had spoken up in the bar. The same part that had driven 4 hours to a cabin she had been avoiding for 5 years. The part that sounded like her father. They pulled up to the house at just past noon. Small, single story, vinyl siding that had surrendered to weather decades ago. Nothing decorative, nothing wasted. A house that existed for function and concealment, and absolutely nothing else. Inside was exactly what 40 years of military service looked like when it came home. Sparse, clean. Every object in its place, because disorder was a luxury that men like Prosper had never been able to afford. A kitchen table scarred by knife marks and coffee rings. Chairs that did not match. Windows covered with curtains thick enough to block light and observation. Prosper made coffee. strong enough to dissolve a spoon. Poured 3 mugs without asking how anyone took it. Set them on the table. Then sat with the heaviness of a man about to lift something he had been carrying for 22 years. He pulled a folder from a locked cabinet beneath the kitchen counter. Set it on the table with the care of someone handling unstable ordnance. Operation Anaconda, March 2002. Shah-e-Kot Valley, Afghanistan. He opened the folder. Photographs spilled across the table like evidence at a trial. Young men in desert camouflage. Mountains behind them. The kind of terrain that did not care about human ambition or military planning, or the difference between good men and bad ones. Terrain that simply existed, ancient and indifferent, and swallowed whoever was foolish enough to enter. 6-man team. Your father led it. His finger touched the first photograph. A man in his late 40s. Lean, intense eyes beneath a boonie hat. Holding a rifle with the casual intimacy of someone holding a part of their own body. Colonel Brennan Calloway. Spectre. Best sniper I ever served with. Best sniper anyone ever served with, though most people will never know his name, because the things he did were classified so deep, they might as well not have happened. His finger moved to the next face. Me. Prosper Redmond. Communications and demolitions. I blew things up and made sure people could talk to each other while I did it. Another photograph. Younger man. Kind face. The sort of face that made you trust him before he spoke. Staff Sergeant Leon Whitaker. Medic. Steadiest hands in the unit. Kept us alive through 3 firefights that should have killed every one of us. His wife was pregnant when we deployed. Little girl born while he was in country. He found out by satellite phone. I watched a grown man weep with joy in the middle of a war zone, then pick up his medical kit and walk into another firefight 20 minutes later. Prosper's voice had gone flat. Professional. The cadence of a man giving a briefing, because briefing mode was the only way to get through what came next without breaking. Corporal Hank Pemberton. Heavy weapons. Wife and 2 kids. Daughter named Emma. Son named Jack. Showed me their pictures every single day. Every day without exception. Like looking at those faces was the thing that kept him human in a place designed to strip humanity away. Another face. Younger still. Alert eyes. The look of someone who noticed everything. Specialist Nolan Crace. Intelligence and languages. Spoke Pashto like he had been born to it. Could walk into a village and disappear. Blend completely. Saved us more times than I can count with information gathered from people who trusted him because he had earned that trust in a language they understood. The last photograph made Thane lean forward. His hand trembled. Just slightly. A vibration so small only someone watching for it would notice. But Ren was watching. A young man, early 20s, bright smile that had not yet learned what the world could do to bright smiles. Same jaw as Thane, same set to the shoulders. Same eyes, though decades younger, and filled with something that Thane's had long since lost. Danny. The word came out broken, a name that was also a wound. Daniel Kelford, Prosper confirmed quietly. Your stepbrother, communications specialist, 22 years old, wanted to be a teacher when he got out. Talked about it constantly. History, if you can believe it. Said he wanted kids to understand where they came from so they could figure out where they were going. He let the silence hold. Let Thane absorb the photograph of a young man he had lost 21 years ago and never stopped looking for in every room he entered. Mission was straightforward. Locate and eliminate Taliban commander Khalid Amari, high-value target, responsible for 12 American deaths in the previous 3 months. Intelligence placed him in a compound in the valley. Prosper pulled out a map. Grid lines, elevation markings, handwritten notes in faded ink. We inserted here, hiked 12 kilometers through terrain that wanted us dead. Set up observation here. Had eyes on the compound for 3 days. Watching. Documenting. Being patient because patience was the only thing that separated us from the people we were hunting. His finger stopped on the map. We found Amari, but we found something else too. Different photograph now, long lens, grainy but clear enough. Grainy, but 3 men standing near a truck with a covered bed. They were not Afghan, not local, not military in any way that matched the mission brief. Americans, civilian clothes, expensive tactical gear, the kind of equipment that did not come from military supply chains, but from corporate budgets. Ren studied the photograph. The men looked comfortable, relaxed, like they belonged there. Like they had been there many times before. Contractors. Private military company called Vanguard Solutions. Prosper's voice carried an edge now, the flat briefing tone beginning to crack. We watched them for 3 days, documented everything, took photographs on a schedule, built a timeline. More photographs spread across the table. A sequence. Men loading crates onto the truck, unloading different crates, meeting with Afghans in traditional dress. Handshakes. Money changing hands. The casual choreography of commerce conducted in a war zone. Those crates contained weapons. Chinese-manufactured AK-47s, RPGs, ammunition, enough to equip a small army. We watched American contractors sell weapons to the same Taliban fighters who were killing American soldiers 20 kilometers away. Thane's hands curled into fists on the table. The wood creaked beneath his grip. Selling to the enemy. While our people died. Not just selling. Prosper pulled out another set of photographs. Burlap sacks being loaded. Men accepting bundles of American currency. Buying, too. Opium. Massive quantities. They were purchasing from warlords shipping through Pakistani contacts, using the profits to buy more weapons to sell back to the insurgents. A cycle. A machine. Self-sustaining and self-enriching. He leaned back, rubbed his face with both hands. The gesture of a man who had lived with this knowledge for 2 decades and still felt its weight every time he spoke it aloud. The longer the war continued, the more opium they moved. The more weapons they sold, the more money they made. $847 million in fraudulent contracts between 2002 and 2008. The number sat in the room like a toxic cloud. A number so large it stopped being money and became something else entirely. Became the reason men died and wars lasted and children grew up without fathers. Vanguard had Department of Defense contracts. Security, logistics, consulting. Billing American taxpayers hundreds of millions while simultaneously funding the enemy. Making sure the war never ended because ending meant their revenue stopped. Ren felt her stomach turn. Not nausea. Something deeper. Something that lived in the space between understanding and acceptance. My father found proof. We all found it. All 6 of us. But Danny is the one who got it. Prosper looked at Thane. That kid was brilliant with technology. Genius level. He cloned one of their laptops during a window we created. 20 minutes while the contractors were at a meeting. Danny walked in, copied, everything walked out. Nobody knew. Prosper pulled another document from the folder. Printouts. Spreadsheets. Email headers. Names. Account numbers. Transaction records. Wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland. Photographs with Vanguard logos visible. Emails between executives and Department of Defense officials discussing contract extensions. Proof. Real documented, undeniable proof that American contractors prolonged a war that killed American soldiers. For profit. Profit they could never spend in 100 lifetimes. What happened when you reported it? We did not. The 3 words landed heavy. Not through normal channels. Prosper's voice was careful now. Your father was too smart for that. He understood how deep this went. Knew Vanguard had connections everywhere. Pentagon, State Department, probably CIA. The kind of connections that turned whistleblowers into casualties and reports into shredded paper. He took a long drink of coffee. His hands shook, just enough to notice. Brennan smuggled the hard drive out, mailed it to a dead drop. Old contact from his Ranger days who could hold it without asking questions. Then we filed our official mission report. Target eliminated. Mission successful. Nothing unusual. Back to business. And then Prosper pulled out one more document. A single page. Names in a column. Dates beside them. Causes of death. 2 weeks later. Daniel Kelford. Killed in what the official report called a vehicle accident. Humvee rollover on a supply route. Body burned beyond recognition. Military funeral with full honors. Flag on the coffin. Letter from the commanding officer expressing deepest sympathy for the loss of a fine young soldier. Thane's voice came out strangled. like words being forced through a space too narrow to hold them. Danny was not in any vehicle that day. He was on base, communications building, nowhere near that supply route. I found out later, years later, after asking questions that nobody wanted to answer. Official reports become truth. Prosper said it without emotion. The moment it is written down and signed and filed, it is real. Even when it is a lie. Especially when it is a lie. You are telling me they murdered him. Thane's voice rose, the control cracking. And you just let them. Prosper met his eyes. Did not flinch from the accusation. We had no proof it was connected. Not then, not anything that would stand up. And the moment we revealed what we knew, we would all be dead. Not in combat, not with honor. Dead in training accidents and vehicle rollovers and suicides that nobody investigated because investigating meant someone had to care, and nobody cared about enlisted men dying in a war zone. He pointed to the list. Leon Whitaker, training accident, 2004. Shot during a live fire exercise. Friendly fire from an unknown position. Investigation concluded it was a tragic mistake. Insufficient evidence to determine responsibility. Case closed. His daughter was 2 years old. Prosper's finger moved down the list. Hank Pemberton, suicide, 2005. Found hanging in his barracks room. His voice cracked, the briefing tone finally failing. Hank Pemberton was the happiest man I have ever known. Wife he worshipped. 2 children he lived for. Planning to retire and teach high school woodworking. Had already applied to a program. No note, no warning, no history of depression or ideation. But the official cause was suicide, and the case was closed because closing cases was easier than opening investigations. Nolan Crace. Vehicle accident. 2007. Single car. Straight road. Broad daylight. Clear weather. No mechanical failure. No alcohol. No skid marks. Just a man who somehow drove off a straight road and died. Bad luck. Tragic coincidence. Case closed. He looked up from the list. Eyes wet. Face hard. By 2007, it was just me and your father. 2 out of 6. The others dead within 5 years of that mission. All in ways that looked like accidents if you did not look closely. If you did not want to see the pattern. If you were the kind of person who believed that 4 healthy soldiers dying in unrelated incidents within 5 years was coincidence rather than execution. Wren's voice came out as a whisper, the only volume she could manage. What did you and my father do? Made a pact. Hide the evidence. Bury it so deep that finding it would require knowledge only we possessed. Wait for the right moment. Stay alive. Stay quiet. Let them think we had forgotten. That we had moved on. That the threat had passed. For how long? 17 years. The number was its own kind of violence. 17 years. Your father retired, bought his cabin in West Virginia. Lived like a man who wanted nothing from the world except to be left alone. Taught you. Read his books. Smoked his pipe. Never talked about Afghanistan or what we found or the brothers we lost. Never spoke their names out loud because speaking them might attract attention, and attention meant death. Prosper walked to the window, stared out at trees that kept no secrets and judged no one. I did the same. Different state. Different life. We communicated through dead drops. Old tradecraft. Physical locations. Nothing digital. Nothing that could be intercepted or traced or used against us. We thought if we stayed invisible long enough, they would forget. Move on. Assume the danger had passed. But they did not. No. Prosper turned back. His face had aged 10 years in the last hour. 2019. Your father contacted me. Emergency protocol we had not used in years. Said someone had come to his cabin. He sat back down. Heavily. Man in an expensive suit. Professional. The kind of man who smiles while describing how easy it would be to destroy your life. Offered Brennan $10 million to hand over the hard drive. Forget everything. Accept a comfortable retirement funded by silence. Go quietly into old age with enough money to never worry about anything again. What did he say? What do you think he said? He was Brennan Calloway. He did not know how to surrender. Did not know how to look the other way. When looking the other way meant letting evil win. Even when looking the other way would have saved his life. Even when everyone would have understood. $10 million, and all he had to do was forget the names of 4 dead friends. Prosper's voice broke on the last word. Rebuilt itself. He called me the night before he died. Payphone. Said if anything happened, I should find you. Wait until you were ready. Make sure you knew the truth. Make sure his death meant something beyond a line in an obituary. The cardiac arrest. Potassium chloride. Prosper spoke the words like a medical examiner reading a report. Injection causes cardiac arrest that presents as completely natural. Undetectable unless you specifically test for it within hours. And nobody tests for it in a 66-year-old man living alone in the mountains. Found dead in his workshop. No signs of struggle. Everything consistent with natural causes. Old man dies. Medical examiner signs the certificate. Case closed. By the time anyone could have tested, the potassium had metabolized. Disappeared. Like it was never there. Like the injection never happened. Like Brennan Calloway simply stopped living because his heart decided it was time. Wren gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. The room seemed to compress around her. The walls moving inward. The ceiling lowering. 5 years of grief transforming into something harder and more dangerous. Her father. The man who raised her alone. Who taught her to read wind and calculate distance and find the calm center within herself, where impossible things became possible. Murdered. Killed while she lived 3 hours away, in comfortable ignorance, too scared to open his letter. Too scared to visit his cabin, too scared to be the person he had spent 15 years preparing her to be. Who? Single word. Hard as the steel targets on the range. A word that was not a question, but a demand. Prosper reached into the folder one final time. A single photograph. Placed it on the table with the precision of a man laying down the last card in a hand he had been holding for decades. A man in his mid-60s. Corporate handsome in the way that expensive tailoring and professional grooming could manufacture. Suit that cost more than Wren's car. American flag pin on the lapel. The practiced smile of someone who had learned to project trustworthiness the way actors learn to project emotion. Shaking hands with someone cropped out of the frame. Conference room behind him. The background of power and money and influence captured in a single image. Dominic Ashgrove, Vice President of Operations for Vanguard Solutions in 2002. Running the entire Afghanistan operation. Signed off on every weapons deal. Authorized every opium purchase. Approved every payment to every warlord who kept the pipeline flowing. Prosper tapped the photograph. Now CEO of Sentinel Global Security. Same company. Different name. Rebranded in 2010 after Vanguard started attracting congressional scrutiny. Changed the letterhead. Changed the logo. Changed nothing else. Wren studied the face. Memorized it the way her father had taught her to memorize a target at distance. Feature by feature. Line by line. Until it was burned into memory so deeply that no amount of time could erase it. 66 years old now. Net worth $2.3 billion. Sentinel has active contracts with the Pentagon, CIA, NSA, Homeland Security, State Department. Every agency that matters. Every door that opens with money rather than merit. Untouchable. Senators on speed dial. Generals at his dinner table. The kind of man who does not face consequences because consequences are for people who cannot afford to avoid them. Thane leaned over the photograph. His breathing had gone shallow. Controlled. The breathing of a man managing rage the way you manage a fire that could consume everything if you let it. He ordered the kills. Cannot prove it without the hard drive. Not directly, but Ashgrove had the most to lose. The laptop Danny cloned had his name everywhere. His digital fingerprints on every transaction. His signature on transfer authorizations. His emails instructing subordinates on how to structure contracts to avoid oversight. If that evidence ever reached a courtroom, his life as he knows it ends. Prosper met Wren's eyes. He knew what we found. He has been eliminating witnesses ever since, methodically, professionally, with the patience of a man who understands that dead men file no complaints and closed cases attract no attention. The kitchen was silent except for the clock. Each tick a small detonation. Each second falling like a stone into water that was already too deep. Wren spoke first. You said my father hid the hard drive. Where? Prosper smiled. The first genuine smile Wren had seen from him. Small. Brief, but real. The smile of a man appreciating craftsmanship. That is the genius of it. Brennan knew they would come after anyone associated with the team, anyone who might know the location. So he did not tell anyone, not even me. Not one living person knew where he put it. Then how do we find it? He left clues. In his letter, in his journals, in the training he gave you. Prosper looked at Wren with the focused attention of a man watching a fuse burn towards something explosive. Everything you need is encoded in knowledge he passed down, in shared experiences that only you have. The best encryption is not digital, Wren. It is memory, experience, knowledge that cannot be tortured out of a prisoner because only one person in the world has the right combination, and that person is you. Wren pulled the letter from her jacket pocket, unfolded it on the table. Read it again with new understanding. Every word reframed, every sentence carrying meaning she had missed the first time because she had been reading a letter from a dead father instead of a message from a man who knew he was about to be killed. The coordinates: 34.8794 degrees north, 79.0128 degrees west. Thane was already searching on his phone. North Carolina, Uwharrie National Forest, middle of nowhere. He looked up. Your father bought land there in the 90s. 20 acres of forest. No structures, no improvements. No reason to own it except hiding something. Prosper flipped over a hand-drawn map. North Carolina, a red mark in dense forest. He buried it there. I am certain, but I do not know exactly where. Those coordinates get you to the general area. 20 acres of forest. You could search for months without more specific information. Wren stared at the letter. Her father's handwriting. Instructions encoded in lessons she had spent 15 years learning and 5 years trying to forget. He said I would know what to do. She closed her eyes, thought through every lesson, every detail, every afternoon on the range when he taught her something that seemed like shooting, but was actually something else entirely. Understanding crystallized slowly, then all at once. The metal box. They walked outside. Wren opened the Honda's trunk, pulled out the metal box wrapped in oilcloth, set it on the hood of Prosper's truck. Simple combination lock. 3 numbers. She tried her birthday. Nothing. Tried Brennan's birthday. Nothing. Thane watched. What are you thinking? Everything meant something. Every detail. He never did anything without purpose. Never wasted a gesture or a word or a number. She looked at the GPS coordinates again. 34.8794. Tried the first 3 digits on the lock. 3, 4, 8. Click. The box opened. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that smelled like the basement in West Virginia, lay a bullet casing, .50 caliber, heavy in her hand, cool from the night air, engraved carefully along the side in letters so small you had to hold it close to read them. Spectre 2, 520, Anaconda 02. Prosper breathed out slowly. The 2520, the shot everyone talks about. Wren turned the casing in her hands, feeling its weight, its history, the violence it represented and the precision it proved. Her father had kept this, not as a trophy, as a key. The hard drive is buried at the exact distance from the coordinates as his record shot, 2,520 yards. She looked up, understanding forming with the clarity of a scope clicking into focus. I need to calculate direction, based on something in his training, something only I would know. Thane whistled softly. Even if someone found the coordinates, they would have no idea which direction, no idea where to dig. Need both distance and bearing. Without that, 20 acres is a needle in 1,000 haystacks, Wren thought. 2,520 yards from the coordinates. But which direction her father would use something meaningful, something she would remember, something personal enough that no interrogation could extract it because no interrogator would know which memory mattered. Her birthday, March 12th, the 71st day of the year. She looked at Prosper. 71 degrees. That is the bearing. 71 degrees from true north. Prosper pulled a protractor from his truck. Old. Military issue. The kind they stopped making decades ago. He spread the map on the hood, measured with the careful precision of a man who understood that at this scale, a single degree of error meant hundreds of feet of wrong. 20 yards at 71 degrees from GPS coordinates. His finger traced the line, stopped at a specific point on the map. Creek Bend. Rock formation. Exactly where the calculation led. Wren stared at the spot on the map. Her father had chosen it, had walked this land and measured these distances and aligned the mathematics of his greatest achievement with the mathematics of his daughter's birthday, and trusted that she would be smart enough to put it together, that she would be brave enough to come looking. We leave tonight. Prosper was already moving, back into the house, pulling gear from closets and locked cabinets. Rifles, ammunition, night vision equipment, medical supplies, communications gear, everything necessary for a tactical operation in hostile territory. Because that was what this was now. Not a hike through the forest, not a treasure hunt. War. If they have been watching you, Prosper said, packing with the speed of decades of muscle memory, and they know you came here. We have maybe a 6-hour head start before they figure out what we are doing and where we are going. Thane pulled out his phone, stared at it, put it away without making a call. What was going to call for backup? Other SEALs, I trust. He paused. But who can I trust if Ash Grove has Pentagon connections? He has military connections. Law enforcement, intelligence community, anyone I call might be compromised, might report back. So it is 3 of us. Prosper handed Thane a rifle. M4A1. Military grade? Like the old days. Small team? Dark of night. Get in. Secure the objective. Get out. He paused, looked at both of them. Except we are not 25 anymore. I am 73 with knees that forecast weather. Thane, you have a decade of hard mileage. Wren, you have not been operational in 5 years. Wren accepted the rifle Prosper handed her. Remington 700. Same model her father used. Same model she had trained with since she was 12 years old. She checked it with hands that remembered. Magazine, chamber, safety, scope alignment, which is why we move fast. Grab the drive, get it to a secure location, then figure out how to go public without dying in the process. They loaded Prosper's truck as the sun touched the horizon. 3 hours to North Carolina, then a night hike through dense forest to find a hard drive buried 22 years ago by a man who had known he might not survive long enough to dig it up himself. A man who had trusted that his daughter would be smart enough and skilled enough and brave enough to finish what he started. Headlights cut through the gathering darkness as they pulled onto the road. Behind them, Prosper's house sat dark and empty. A safe house that was no longer safe. A refuge whose expiration date had arrived the moment Wren broke that record in front of 30 cameras. Thane watched the mirrors. 20 minutes of silence before he spoke. Black Ford Explorer. 3 cars back. Been there since we left. Prosper's jaw tightened. Spotted it 5 minutes ago. Professional tail. Proper distance. Rotating with at least 1 backup vehicle. Standard surveillance protocol. Can we lose them? Not without confirming we know they are there. Better to let them follow. Make them think we are unaware. Ghost them when we get closer to the objective. Wren turned carefully, looked through the rear window. The Explorer was there. Dark tinted windows, maintaining perfect distance, neither too close nor too far. The precision of professionals following a protocol they had executed many times before. Thane's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his face hardened. Text from unknown number. He read it aloud, the words falling into the truck like stones. Stop digging, or everyone dies. Silence. Just the engine and the road and the darkness pressing against the windows. Trying to scare us off. Prosper's hands did not move on the wheel. Means they are not ready to act. Want us to quit. Walk away. Forget. Will they let us? Wren asked the question that mattered most. The question that would determine whether what they were doing was a mission or a suicide run. If we stopped right now, turned around, would they leave us alone? Prosper met her eyes in the rearview mirror. The truth arrived before his words did. She could see it in the way his face changed. in the way his eyes went flat and honest. Your father tried that for 17 years. Stayed quiet, hidden, minded his own business. How did that work out for him? The answer did not need speaking. A 66-year-old man dead in his workshop with potassium chloride in his blood and a death certificate that said cardiac arrest. No walking away. Not anymore. Maybe never. The moment Brennan Calloway copied that laptop and refused to destroy the evidence and chose truth over safety, he set this in motion. Now Wren was caught in the current, pulled forward by forces that her father had understood and she was only beginning to comprehend. Prosper turned onto a smaller road, then smaller. The Explorer followed, patient, relentless. Thane found the GPS tracker 30 minutes later. Small electronic device, magnetic mount, fixed under the rear wheel well. He held it up in the dim light of the cab. They have known about us longer than tonight. At least 2 days. Before you even made that shot, the realization hit Wren with physical force. They had been watching her. Not since the range. Before. Watching the cabin. Waiting. Monitoring her movements with the patient precision of people who had unlimited resources and unlimited time and absolutely no moral boundaries. Her breaking the record had not alerted them. It had confirmed what they already suspected, that Spectre Calloway had passed something to his daughter, that the knowledge had not died with him. The shot just gave them proof. Wren's voice was steady when she spoke. We keep the tracker active for now. Let them think we do not know. When we get close, we dump it somewhere that sends them the wrong direction. Prosper glanced at her in the mirror. His expression shifted. Respect for tactical thinking that came from somewhere deeper than training. From blood. They drove another hour. Then Wren placed the tracker on the rear bumper of a logging truck parked at a rest stop heading south. Let Sentinel chase lumber toward the coast while they turned west into the mountains. Prosper killed the headlights 20 minutes later. The world went black. Only moonlight filtering through canopy. He accelerated. The truck lurched forward blind. Branches scraping both sides. Something cracking under the tires. He knew these roads. Had driven them 100 times in preparation for exactly this kind of moment. Hard left onto a trail barely wider than the truck. Branches closing from both sides like walls. The kind of path you would miss if you did not know exactly where to look for it. He drove 10 more minutes through paths that existed only in the memory of old soldiers who understood that terrain was sometimes the most powerful weapon available. Then pulled the truck into a ravine. Killed the engine. Silence rushed in like water filling a void. Forest sounds. Wind in branches. A creek somewhere nearby running over stones in the darkness. We walk from here. 5 miles to coordinates. Move fast and quiet. There by midnight. Retrieve the drive. Gone before they figure out where we disappeared. They geared up in darkness. Rifles. Night vision. Water. First aid. Prosper moved with the efficiency of a man who had done this 10,000 times. Thane with the precision of training so deep it operated without conscious thought. Wren followed their lead, copying their economy of motion, willing her body to remember things her mind had tried to forget. They moved into the forest in tactical formation, Prosper on point, Thane rear security, Wren in the middle with the GPS unit, guiding them toward coordinates that represented either salvation or destruction. The forest was alive with sound. Crickets and frogs and small animals moving through undergrowth. An owl calling. The creek growing louder as they moved deeper. Wren's heart hammered. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every snapping branch like an approaching enemy. But she kept moving. Because stopping was not an option. Because her father had prepared her for this moment, even if she had not known it at the time. Because somewhere ahead, buried in North Carolina soil, lay the truth about why good men died and bad men prospered, and the world kept turning as if none of it mattered. After an hour, Prosper raised his fist. Everyone stopped. He pointed through the trees, a small clearing ahead. 6 figures moving with tactical precision. Dark clothing, weapons, night vision. Professional operators conducting a systematic search. Digging. Testing. Looking for something they knew was in this forest but could not pinpoint. They had beaten them here. Despite the tail shaking, despite the tracker misdirection, Sentinel had predicted the general location and deployed a team, but they were searching blind. digging in wrong places, testing grid by grid. The kind of methodical approach that would take days to cover 20 acres. They did not have the calculation, did not know about 20 yards at 71 degrees, did not understand how a father encoded secrets in the education of his daughter. Prosper made hand signals, wordless communication from decades of operating together. They backed away, circled, used the forest as concealment. 30 more minutes of careful movement brought them to a ridgeline overlooking the clearing, 200 yards of separation. High ground. Through her night vision scope, Wren could see clearly. 6 contractors, digging holes in wrong locations. 3 holes already. Searching, testing. Prosper pointed to a location 50 yards from where the contractors worked. A distinctive rock formation. Creek Bend. Exactly where Wren's calculations predicted. That was the spot. She could see it, could almost feel the hard drive waiting beneath the soil. 22 years of patience about to end. Prosper looked at Thane. Thane nodded. They moved down the ridge in silence. 2 old soldiers flowing through darkness with the practiced invisibility of men who had spent careers in places where being seen meant dying. Wren stayed on the ridge, rifle steady, scope tracking the contractors, her finger beside the trigger. Ready. Prosper and Thane reached the rock formation, started digging, fast but controlled, dirt coming up in careful amounts. No noise, no waste. One contractor turned, raised his night vision, scanned the tree line. Wren's crosshair settled on his chest. 200 yards, center mass. She could make this shot without thinking. Her finger touched the trigger. Not yet, not unless necessary. The contractor's radio crackled. He responded, turned away, went back to supervising. Prosper's hand came up from the hole holding something. Waterproof case, military specification, the kind of container designed to survive decades underground. He showed it to Thane. Even from 200 yards through green-tinted night vision, Wren could see the relief on both their faces. They had found it. Then light exploded from 3 directions at once. Floodlights on tripods. Blinding. Overwhelming. Night turned to artificial noon in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Wren ripped off her night vision, blinked against the sudden assault of light that turned the forest clearing into a stage. Prosper and Thane stood frozen in the open, caught, exposed, surrounded. The tactical nightmare every operator feared more than bullets. The moment when concealment failed and numbers became the only math that mattered. A voice boomed through a bullhorn. Amplified, authoritative, the voice of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. Sergeant Major Redmond. Mr. Kelford. Set down the case. Hands on heads. You are surrounded by 20 contractors with orders to shoot. 20. Not 6. The others had been hidden, waiting in positions they had occupied for hours. Patient, invisible. The entire clearing was a trap, carefully orchestrated. Let them find the drive, then take it, along with their lives. Dominic Ashgrove had known they were coming. Not the general area this time, the specific night. Someone or something had told him the timeline. Perhaps the cabin's surveillance had captured more than Wren realized. Perhaps the pattern of her movements had been analyzed by people whose job was turning data into prediction. The voice came again. Closer now. We know you are up there too, Miss Calloway. Thermal imaging is quite clear. Put down the rifle and come out. Or we start shooting your friends. You have 10 seconds to decide. The count began. 10. Wren's mind raced. Thermal imaging. They had been tracking her the entire time. Every position, every movement. She had been in crosshairs since reaching the ridge. 9. 8. Prosper looked up toward her position. Even blinded by floodlights, even without night vision, he found exactly where she was. Instinct built from decades of reading terrain. He shook his head, mouthed one word. Run. 7, 6, 5. Thane's hand moved toward his rifle. Last resort. Final defiance. 4, 3. Wren stood, stepped into the light. Rifle lowered, hands visible. Because the alternative was watching 2 men die for trying to help her find the truth her father died to protect. Don't shoot. I am coming out. She walked down the ridge, through the trees, into the clearing where floodlights turned night into day, and 20 rifles tracked her every step. Prosper's face showed relief fighting with fury. Thane looked like a man swallowing broken glass. A figure stepped forward from the darkness beyond the lights. Older, distinguished, expensive outdoor clothing that had never seen actual wilderness. Silver hair. The confident smile of a man who had won every game he had ever played because he had written the rules and hired the referees. Dominic Ashgrove, $2.3 billion wearing flannel and tactical boots. The man who had ordered her father's death. Who had killed good men to protect profit margins. Who had corrupted a war and gotten away with it for 22 years. He looked at Wren the way a collector examines a rare specimen. Appreciative, clinical, ultimately dispassionate about whether the specimen lives or dies. Spectre Calloway's daughter. You have his eyes. Same stubborn determination that got him killed. He gestured at the waterproof case in Prosper's hands. Thank you for finding that. Been looking 22 years, spent millions searching. You just led me right to it. His smile widened. Almost makes me wish I had let your father live. He trained you well. Wren held his gaze, held it the way her father taught her to hold a target in her scope. Steady, patient, unblinking. You murdered him. I solved a problem. There is a difference. A contractor stepped forward, took the case from Prosper's unresisting hands. 20 rifles made resistance a mathematical certainty of death. Dominic opened the case. Inside, wrapped in vacuum-sealed plastic, a hard drive. Military grade. 2 terabytes. 22 years of patience compressed into 6 ounces of silicon and circuitry. He held it up. Studied it. $847 million. That is what this little device represents. Evidence that would put me in prison until I died. He smiled at it. Smiled at evidence of his own crimes the way some men smile at photographs of enemies they have defeated. If it ever saw the light of day, which it will not. You killed my stepbrother. Thane's voice was flat. Dead. The voice of a man who had stopped caring about his own survival and was now operating on something older and colder than self-preservation. Danny Kelford, 22 years old, communications specialist. Wanted to be a teacher, believed in his country, died for it, but not the way they told us. I removed obstacles. Dominic's expression did not change, did not register guilt or shame or any recognition that what he was describing might be monstrous. Daniel was an obstacle, as were Whitaker and Pemberton and Crace, and your father, Miss Calloway. Good men, I am sure, principled, honorable, but good men who stood between me and the evolution of modern warfare. He paused, looked at each of them in turn. When I started, I believed in the mission. Genuinely. Stability in Afghanistan. Infrastructure. Democracy. He said the words without irony. But I learned something your father never did. Idealism is a luxury. The world runs on leverage and capital and the willingness to make decisions that principled men cannot stomach. Your father could kill a man at 2,500 yards, but could not bring himself to accept that the war he fought in was a business. That is not strength. That is naivety. The clearing was silent. 20 rifles, floodlights humming. Generators somewhere in the darkness providing power for this moment where truth and wealth stood face to face, and wealth held all the weapons. You are going to kill us now. Not a question from Wren. A statement. Acceptance spoken in the same calm voice she used behind a rifle. The voice that said she had made her calculations and understood the outcome. Dominic's smile shifted, became something almost human. I am giving you a choice. Same choice I gave your father before he made the mistake of refusing. He showed them a phone screen. Bank account. Offshore. Balance large enough to make the numbers seem abstract. $20 million. Split 3 ways. Wire transfer. Instant. Untraceable. Enough to disappear. Live anywhere. Forget tonight ever happened. Wren looked at the screen. Looked at the number. Then looked at Dominic Ashgrove with eyes that her father had given her, and a certainty that her father had built in her, and spoke the words that changed everything. You need us alive. Dominic's eyebrow rose. Slight motion, carefully controlled. And why would I need that? Because you do not know if that is the only copy. Silence. Complete. Even the generators seemed to hold their breath. My father had 22 years. He was the most methodical man who ever lived. Do you really believe he buried one hard drive without insurance, without backups? She was bluffing. Manufacturing certainty from nothing. But Dominic could not know that. Could not be sure. And uncertainty her father had taught her was the most powerful weapon available to someone who had no others. For all you know, there are 3 copies. 5, 10, hidden in locations you will never find without our cooperation. Dominic's smile faded. The first crack in 22 years of absolute confidence. Thane spoke. Steady, calm. The voice of a man who had just drawn the only card that mattered. Fort Bragg. Safety deposit box. Bank of America on Bragg Boulevard. Box 347. Key hidden at the base of the flagpole at the Special Operations Memorial. He paused. Let it settle into the silence like a depth charge sinking toward a target. Your father told me, the week before he died. Said if anything happened, that is where I would find insurance. He set it up through Danny's father, David. David did not know what was in the box. Just knew Brennan asked him to rent it and keep paying the monthly fee. No questions. No. Old soldier's favor. Dominic stared at Thane, then turned to a contractor with a laptop and satellite connection. Check it. Rapid typing. Screens glowing. The contractor's face went pale. Sir, there is a box registered under that number. Rented 2019. Still active. Monthly payments from an account registered to David Kelford. Doubt. For the first time in this clearing. For maybe the first time in 22 years. Doubt crossing Dominic Ashgrove's face like a cloud crossing the sun. Wren stepped forward. One step. Enough to close distance. Enough to make the conversation feel like negotiation rather than execution. Here is what happens. We walk away tonight. All of us. You keep your freedom. We keep ours. And we establish insurance. Mutual assured destruction. We have evidence that destroys you. You have resources that could destroy us. Neither side moves. Neither side wins. Neither side loses. Balance. She held his eyes. Did not blink. Cold War doctrine kept 2 superpowers from annihilating each other for 50 years. It can work between us. Dominic studied her face for a long time. The floodlights hummed. The forest waited. 20 rifles remained aimed at 3 people who had just changed the mathematics of their own survival. Your father made a similar proposal. I rejected it. And look where that got you. 22 years of paranoia, hunting old men, spending millions on cleanup, living in fear that someday the truth surfaces. Not because we expose you, but because you drew too much attention trying to silence us. Dominic's jaw tightened. 1 week. His voice was silk stretched over steel. You have 1 week to set up your dead man's switch and prove it is real. If I find evidence you are trying to expose what is on that drive, the deal is off. And everyone you have ever loved pays the price. His finger pointed at Wren. Your daughter. Juniper. 16. Honor student. Wants to be a veterinarian. Richmond High School. Walks home along Maple Street. Arrives at approximately 3:45 every afternoon. The threat needed no elaboration. Understood. Wren nodded. So did Prosper and Thane. Dominic gestured to his contractors. Weapons lowered reluctantly. The tension remained, thick as smoke, but the immediate mathematics of death had been recalculated. He turned to the contractor holding the waterproof case, handed the hard drive back to Wren. Not generosity. Strategy. If she was telling the truth about backups, keeping 1 copy accomplished nothing, and returning it demonstrated that he was not afraid of it. That he believed his power exceeded whatever was stored on 6 ounces of silicon. Wren took it, held it against her chest. Dominic walked past her, stopped, spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. Your father was a better man than I am. But better men do not change the world. They just die with clean consciences. He met her eyes one final time. You have his skill. I hope you do not inherit his martyrdom. because next time there will be no negotiation, only bullets. Then he was gone, walking into darkness beyond the floodlights, contractors following one by one until only the humming lights remained, casting harsh shadows across a clearing that had almost become a graveyard. The moment the last contractor disappeared into the trees, Ren's legs nearly gave out. 5 years of avoiding this world. 5 years of pretending she was someone else. And now she stood in a North Carolina forest at 2 in the morning with a hard drive pressed against her heart and 1 week to build a cage strong enough to hold a billionaire. Thane caught her elbow, steadied her. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I have ever witnessed. The safety deposit box. Ren looked at him. Was that real? Thane's expression was granite. Then it softened. Just barely. Brennan called me, week before he died. Said he had set something up through Danny's father. Told me the location. I never checked it. Never had reason to. Until tonight. Ren stared at him. You mean it might actually be there? Thane met her eyes. I think your father prepared for every possibility, including the one where his daughter would need a man standing next to her to say the right thing at the right time. Prosper gathered the waterproof case, held it with both hands. Real or not, it bought us time. Now we use that time. First we secure this, then we build the rest. They gathered their equipment and moved back into the forest, 3 figures disappearing into darkness. Behind them, the floodlights shut off one by one. The clearing returned to shadow. The forest closed around the evidence of what had happened like water closing over a stone. Ren walked between 2 old soldiers through trees that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more, carrying knowledge that could destroy an empire, carrying the weight of her father's legacy and 4 dead men's silence and a 16-year-old daughter who did not know that her mother had just gambled with death and won. Barely. 1 week, 7 days to build a cage strong enough to hold a billionaire and keep 3 people alive. 7 days to honor a promise made in a basement at 2 in the morning to a man who had believed his daughter was better than he ever was. 3 months passed like a held breath. The kind of months where you wake each morning and the first thought is not coffee or weather or the tasks ahead, but a single quiet question. Am I still alive? And the answer surprises you. Every single time. Ren went back to teaching American history at Richmond High School. Standing in front of 30 teenagers who cared more about their phones than the Constitutional Convention. Explaining the Bill of Rights to kids who had never considered that rights were things people died to establish and died again to protect. The irony lived inside her like a second heartbeat. Teaching sanitized versions of democracy while carrying truth that would never appear in any textbook. Truth about how power actually worked, how money bought silence, how good men vanished, and the machine kept running because machines do not have consciences. She taught. She graded papers. She drove Juniper to volleyball practice on Tuesday evenings and helped with chemistry homework at the kitchen table while dinner cooled on the stove. She lived the life of a woman who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear and no particular reason to check the rearview mirror 17 times on the drive to work. But every Wednesday at exactly 9 in the morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Thane. All good. 2 words. The most important words in her week. Proof of life. Confirmation that the arrangement still held. That Dominic Ashgrove had not moved. That the cage they had built in 7 frantic days was still standing because they had built it. In that first week after the forest, Ren had not slept more than 3 hours on any given night. Prosper knew a lawyer. Retired JAG officer living in Montana. Man named Greer Talmadge, who had spent 30 years in military law and now raised horses and wanted nothing to do with the world he had left behind. Until Prosper called and said 3 words that changed his retirement. Spectre needs you. Talmadge set up the dead man's switch. Sealed package held in a secure location known only to him. Instructions clear. If Ren or Thane or Prosper failed to check in for 2 consecutive weeks, the package would be opened and its contents distributed to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Senate Armed Services Committee simultaneously. The package contained enough information to point investigators toward the hard drive without revealing its exact location. Enough to start fires that Dominic could not extinguish, not the drive itself. They were not that reckless, but enough to ensure that their deaths would trigger the very exposure Dominic feared most. Mutual assured destruction. Theoretical physics applied to human corruption. The principle that had prevented nuclear war for half a century, now preventing a billionaire from killing 3 people who knew his secrets. Dominic tested it. Of course he did. Sent a contractor to Montana, who asked too many questions in a small town where strangers were noticed and remembered. Talmadge reported the visit. Prosper reported it to Wren. The system worked. The cage held. Meanwhile, the hard drive sat in a triple-locked safe in a climate-controlled storage facility outside Richmond. Biometric scan. Key code. Physical lock. 3 people required to open it. 3 people required to close it. A system designed so that no single person could access the evidence under coercion, even under torture, even under threat. The math required willing cooperation from all 3. So the months passed. Wren taught history, checked her mirror, received Wednesday texts, and waited. Then the Marine Corps called. Not literally the Corps. A civilian recruiter working for the Training and Education Command at Quantico. They had seen the video. 30 million views and counting on YouTube. The bartender who broke a Navy SEAL's 10-year sniper record using nothing but hand calculations and a rifle she had never fired before. The algorithm had turned her into something she never intended to be. Famous. Visible. A symbol of precision in a world that valued spectacle. They wanted her as a civilian contractor, precision marksmanship instructor, teaching young Marines the fundamentals that were being lost to technology. How to calculate without computers. How to read wind without instruments. How to find the stillness within yourself where impossible shots became inevitable. Every instinct said no. Stay invisible. Protect Juniper. Do not attract more attention than 30 million views had already attracted. But her father's voice. Not a specific memory this time. Just the accumulated weight of 15 years of lessons that were never only about shooting. Some things are worth the risk, Wren. If you spend your whole life hiding, you are already dead. You are just waiting for your body to catch up. She took the job. First day at Quantico. August heat pressing down on the range like a physical weight. 30 Marines assembled in formation. Young. Most of them under 25. Fresh from the School of Infantry with new boots and newer attitudes. They looked at her and saw a 43-year-old woman in civilian clothes who weighed 120 pounds and had no military insignia and no apparent reason to be standing where she was standing. Skepticism radiated off them like heat from asphalt. She could feel it. The sideways glances, the suppressed smirks, the unspoken question that lived in the space between military culture and civilian reality. Wren did not introduce herself, did not explain her credentials, did not ask for attention or respect or the benefit of the doubt. She walked to the firing position, set up a target at 2,000 yards, knelt behind the Remington 700 that Prosper had returned to her, her father's rifle, the one with the walnut stock he had carved himself. The Marines watched, some with arms crossed, some whispering. She calculated, wind from the southwest at 9 miles per hour, temperature 87 degrees, humidity 71%, Coriolis effect at this latitude and direction, bullet drop over 2,000 yards of flight, all of it processed without instruments, without devices, without anything between her mind and the mathematics of the physical world. She fired. 4 seconds of silence. Then the clang reached them, carried across the range by wind that did not care about rank or gender, or the assumptions of young men who had not yet learned that excellence arrived in packages they did not expect. Nobody spoke. She stood, turned to face them. 30 faces that had rearranged themselves from doubt to something that looked like hunger. Good morning, Marines. I am Wren Calloway. My father was Colonel Brennan Calloway. Call sign Spectre. He made a 2,520-yard combat shot in Afghanistan without a computer, without a spotter, without anything except skill and patience, and the understanding that invisible forces shape everything. Today, I am going to teach you how to do what you think is impossible. One Marine raised his hand. Young, maybe 19. Fresh tattoo on his forearm. The eagerness of someone who had not yet learned to hide it. Ma'am, what is the most important thing about being a sniper? Wren thought about her father, about Prosper and Thane, about Danny and Leon and Hank and Nolan, about men who had died for truth and the woman who carried that truth forward. Patience. Some shots take years to line up. Some targets require more than skill. They require time, position, and the willingness to wait for the perfect moment. She taught them. Day after day, week after week. Not just marksmanship, philosophy. The understanding that a rifle was a tool and the shooter was the system. That reading wind was the same as reading people. That patience was not passive, but the most aggressive form of preparation. That her father's lessons encoded in ballistic coefficients and elevation tables were actually lessons about life and duty, and the refusal to accept that some things could not be changed. And while she taught, she planned. Because Wren Calloway was not waiting. She was positioning. The first contact was quiet. A letter, handwritten, no return address, delivered to a post office box in a small town in Virginia that only Wren knew about. Addressed to Eleanor Whitaker, Leon's widow, the woman whose husband had been shot during a training exercise in 2004 and who had raised a daughter alone on a military pension, and the bitter knowledge that the explanation she had been given never made sense. Wren did not identify herself in the letter, did not mention the hard drive or Sentinel or Dominic Ashgrove. She simply wrote that she was the daughter of a man who had served with Leon, that her father had spoken of him with respect and sadness, that she wanted to meet. If Eleanor was willing, Eleanor was willing. They met at a diner in Norfolk, two women sitting across from each other in a vinyl booth, coffee going cold between them. Eleanor was 58, gray before her time, hands that shook slightly when she talked about Leon, the tremor of grief that had calcified into something permanent. Wren listened, told her own story. Not the hard drive, not the conspiracy, just the loss. Father and husband, different men taken by the same silence, the same system that turned murder into paperwork and paperwork into closure. Eleanor cried. First time in years, she said. First time someone had treated Leon's death as something other than a line item in a personnel file. Wren contacted the others over the following weeks. Each one carefully. Each one through channels that could not be monitored. Hank Pemberton's children. Emma, now 26. Jack, 24. They had grown up being told their father killed himself. Grew up carrying the weight of that lie like stones in their pockets. Emma had become a counselor. Spent her career helping people survive the kind of grief that had shaped her childhood. Jack had enlisted, served 2 tours, come home with his own scars and his own silence. Nolan Crace's sister, Vivian, 70 years old, still living in the same house in Pennsylvania where she and Nolan had grown up. Still keeping his room exactly as he had left it. Still waiting for an explanation that made sense for why her brother drove off a straight road in broad daylight and died. Wren did not tell any of them about the evidence, not yet. She built connections. Trust. The slow, patient work of creating a network that could bear weight when weight needed bearing. The same methodology her father had used. The same patience, except Wren was not hiding. She was building. 6 months after the forest. January. Cold enough in Virginia that breath hung visible in morning air, and the firing range at Quantico felt like shooting in a freezer. Wren came home from work on a Tuesday evening. Juniper was at volleyball practice. The house should have been empty. It was not. Nothing had been taken. Nothing disturbed. But on the kitchen counter, placed with deliberate precision, where Wren would see it the moment she walked in, was a photograph. Juniper. Walking to school. Backpack over one shoulder. Earbuds in. Smiling at something on her phone. The photograph was taken from across the street. Professional lens. Perfect focus. The kind of image that said we can reach her whenever we want. Beneath the photograph, a single line written in black ink. Insurance policies require regular renewal. Wren stood in her kitchen and looked at the photograph of her daughter and felt something shift inside her chest. Not fear. She had expected fear, had prepared for it, had practiced the breathing exercises her father taught her for moments when the body wanted to panic and the mind needed to remain operational. What she felt instead was clarity, the kind of clarity that came when all the variables resolved and the wind pattern revealed itself and the mathematics converged on a single point, the kind of clarity that preceded her best shots, the absolute certainty that the moment had arrived. Dominic Ashgrove had broken the arrangement, had crossed the only line that mattered, had reached toward her daughter, and in doing so had committed the one strategic error that Wren had been waiting for. He had given her permission to stop waiting. She picked up her phone, called Thane, then Prosper. Conference call on a burner line that existed for exactly this purpose. He broke the agreement first. Her voice was calm, flat, the voice she used behind a rifle. The voice that contained no emotion because emotion was noise, and noise degraded accuracy. He threatened Juniper. Rules change now. Prosper spoke first. What are you thinking? I am thinking we stop playing defense. Thane's voice carried the dangerous quiet of a man who had been holding himself back and no longer needed to. Tell us the plan. The plan had been forming for months, assembling itself in the background while Wren taught Marines and graded papers and lived the life of a woman who was not building a weapon. Every contact with the families, every relationship carefully cultivated, every piece of information gathered and filed and cross-referenced. All of it preparation, all of it leading to this moment. Wren had studied Dominic Ashgrove the way her father had taught her to study a target at extreme range. Patient observation over weeks and months, learning his patterns, his vulnerabilities, his blind spots. And she had found one. The Senate Armed Services Committee had opened an investigation into defense contractor fraud 6 weeks earlier. Routine oversight triggered by a whistleblower complaint from inside a different company entirely. Nothing to do with Sentinel Global. Nothing to do with Afghanistan or Vanguard or buried hard drives. Just the normal machinery of government grinding forward in its slow, inefficient way. But the investigation's scope was broad. And Sentinel Global was on the preliminary list of contractors flagged for financial review. Not targeted, not suspected, just included in a wide net cast by staffers who had no idea what they might catch. Wren had been watching this investigation the way she watched wind flags, waiting for the pattern, waiting for the moment when external forces aligned with internal readiness. The moment had arrived. She did not go to the committee directly, did not walk into a Senate office building carrying a hard drive and a story that would sound like conspiracy theory without context. Her father had taught her better than that. Had taught her that the most effective shot was the one where the target never knew you were there until the bullet arrived. Instead, she went to the families, sat with Eleanor Whitaker and showed her the evidence. Leon's name in official documents, the timeline that connected his death to the discovery, the pattern of elimination that turned coincidence into certainty. Sat with Emma Pemberton, who looked at photographs of her father's unit and heard for the first time that Hank Pemberton had not killed himself, that he had been murdered, that the lie she had carried for 21 years was not her father's failure, but someone else's crime. Sat with Jack Pemberton, who held the same photographs and wept without sound the way soldiers weep. Internal, contained, devastating. Sat with Vivian Crace, who said she had always known, had always felt it, that her brother did not drive off that road, that the explanation never explained anything, that 20 years of doubt had finally found solid ground. Each family made their own decision. Wren did not pressure, did not persuade. She presented the truth and let the truth do what truth does when it finally reaches people who have been starving for it. Every single one of them said the same thing. What do we do now? Wren told them. The families contacted the Senate committee through their own channels, constituent letters, phone calls to staffers, requests for meetings. Not about Sentinel specifically, about their loved ones, about deaths that had never been properly investigated, about patterns that deserved attention. Individually, each letter was a grievance. Together, they formed a constellation. Points of light that when connected drew a picture that investigators could not ignore. The committee expanded its scope. Subpoenas were issued. Sentinel employees received letters requiring testimony under oath. And some of those employees, the ones who had been carrying their own secrets and their own guilt, began to cooperate. The machine started to fracture. Wren watched from a distance, teaching Marines by day, monitoring the investigation's progress through public records and Prosper's contacts by night. Patient, precise, letting the external investigation build its own momentum before introducing the evidence that would turn suspicion into certainty. Dominic Ashgrove responded the way powerful men respond when the ground shifts beneath them. He hired lawyers, lobbyists, public relations firms that specialized in making problems disappear. He called in favors from senators who owed him, and generals who needed him, and officials who feared him. But the families kept calling, the staffers kept digging, the cooperating witnesses kept talking, and the committee kept expanding its scope because every thread they pulled revealed 3 more threads beneath it. 8 months after the forest. A Thursday morning in March. Wren received a call from Prosper. FBI executed a search warrant on Sentinel's headquarters this morning. Unrelated to us. Based on evidence from cooperating witnesses and financial irregularities in current contracts. They walked in with boxes and walked out with servers. Wren closed her eyes. Felt the wind settle. Felt the pattern complete itself. It is time. That evening, she drove to the storage facility outside Richmond, where the hard drive waited in its triple-locked safe. Thane met her there. Prosper arrived 20 minutes later. 3 people standing in a climate-controlled storage unit, surrounded by the architecture of 2 decades of preparation. They opened the safe together. 3 people required. 3 keys. 3 codes. The system Prosper had designed to ensure no single person could access the evidence alone. Wren held the hard drive. 6 ounces. Light enough to hold in one hand. Heavy enough to destroy an empire. Tomorrow morning, Wren said. We deliver this to the FBI field office in Washington. Then we contact the committee. Then we go on record. Prosper looked at her for a long time. Old eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. Your father would be proud. My father would say we took too long. Prosper smiled. First real smile in months. He would. Brennan was never patient about justice, only about shooting. The Senate hearing room was smaller than Wren expected. Wood-paneled, formal, cameras positioned at angles designed to capture faces in high definition. Every expression, every pause, every moment of testimony preserved for a record that would exist long after everyone in this room was gone. She sat at the witness table, Thane on her left, Prosper on her right. Behind them in the gallery sat the people who had earned the right to be here through decades of grief and silence and the refusal to accept lies dressed as closure. David Kelford, Danny's father. White-haired now, 81 years old, hands folded in his lap, sitting upright with the posture of a man who had waited 23 years for this morning and would not dishonor it by slouching. Eleanor Whitaker, holding a photograph of Leon that she had carried in her purse for 22 years. Emma Pemberton, Jack Pemberton beside her. Brother and sister who had grown up believing their father chose to leave them, now sitting in a room where the truth would finally be spoken aloud. Vivian Crace, 70 years old, wearing a pin with Nolan's unit insignia, her hands steady for the first time in years. The committee chairman called the hearing to order. Cameras activated, the red lights like small eyes watching everything. Miss Calloway, can you confirm for the committee that Sentinel Global Security, formerly Vanguard Solutions, engaged in fraudulent defense contracts between 2002 and 2008? Yes, Senator. $847 million. Documented. And these contracts involved what specifically Wren spoke the way she shot. Precise. Controlled. Every word placed with the same deliberation she gave to every calculation behind a rifle. Weapons sales to Taliban fighters during active combat operations. Simultaneously holding security contracts with the United States government. Opium trafficking through Pakistani intermediaries. Systematic prolonging of combat operations for the purpose of generating continued revenue from both legal contracts and illegal trafficking. How do you know this? My father, Colonel Brennan Calloway, United States Army Special Forces, and 5 other members of his team. They discovered evidence during Operation Anaconda in March 2002. They documented everything, created a hard drive containing financial records, photographs, email correspondence, and transaction logs. And where is this evidence now? In the custody of the Federal Bureau of Investigation as of yesterday morning. Murmur through the gallery. Cameras clicking. The sound of truth entering a room that had heard too many lies. In the back of the hearing room, seated between 2 federal marshals, Dominic Ashgrove sat handcuffed. His silver hair still perfect. His suit still expensive. But his face had changed. The confidence that had radiated from him like heat from a furnace had gone cold. Replaced by the stillness of a man who understood that the mathematics had finally turned against him. The committee chairman leaned forward. Miss Calloway, you and your colleagues recovered this evidence over 2 years ago. You held it for that entire period without making it public. Can you explain to this committee why Wren looked at the chairman, then at the cameras, then at the families sitting behind her, who had carried silence like a disease for over 2 decades. Because we were protecting ourselves, Senator. Dominic Ashgrove demonstrated a willingness to kill anyone who threatened him. 4 members of my father's team were murdered between 2003 and 2007. My father was killed in 2019. We established a system of mutual deterrence to stay alive long enough to see this day. And what changed? What made you decide to come forward now? Wren paused, felt the weight of the question, felt the cameras and the silence and the history pressing against her from every direction. The world changed, Senator. Other whistleblowers came forward from within Sentinel. Congressional oversight began independently of our evidence. Investigative journalists started asking the right questions. We were no longer alone. The truth was already moving. We just gave it the final push. She looked directly at the camera. Not at the senators, not at the lawyers. At the lens that would carry her words to living rooms and phones and screens across the country. My father taught me that some shots take years to line up. That patience is not weakness. That the most important thing about being precise is knowing when to wait and when to fire. He waited 17 years. I waited 5 more. 22 years from discovery to this room. But we are here now, and the evidence speaks for itself. The hearing lasted 6 hours. Testimony from Wren, from Thane, who described his stepbrother's death and the 20 years of unanswered questions that followed. From Prosper, who named the dead and described their deaths with the flat precision of a man delivering a briefing he had rehearsed in his mind 10,000 times. FBI agents testified about what they had found on the hard drive. Financial forensics that confirmed every claim. Transaction records that traced money from the Department of Defense to Vanguard Solutions to Taliban intermediaries, and back again in a loop so elegant and so monstrous that the committee members sat in visible silence when the full scope was presented. Dominic Ashgrove's attorney requested a recess. It was denied. Outside the hearing room hours later, Washington in early spring. Cherry blossoms not yet blooming, but the air carrying the promise of them. The kind of afternoon where the light hit the marble buildings at angles that made them look like monuments to something worth believing in. Wren stood on the steps with Thane and Prosper. Reporters below. Cameras. Questions shouted from a distance that felt appropriate for people who dealt in truth that had been buried. David Kelford approached. 81 years old. Walking with the cane his son had given him the Christmas before deployment. A gift from a 21-year-old boy who thought his father's knees needed help. He shook Wren's hand. Then Thane's. Held Thane's hand longer than necessary. Thank you for not forgetting Danny. Thane's voice was thick, rough. The voice of a man allowing himself to feel something he had kept locked away for 2 decades. He was my brother. Eleanor Whitaker hugged Prosper. No words. Arms around an old soldier who had carried her husband's memory through 17 years of silence and 5 more of preparation. Emma Pemberton stopped in front of Wren. 26 years old. Her father's eyes in a face that had learned to smile despite everything. My dad talked about your father. Said Colonel Calloway was the best man he ever served with. Your dad was pretty extraordinary himself. Emma smiled, the kind of smile that cost 21 years of grief to earn. Then she walked down the steps to where Jack waited. Brother and sister. Children of a man whose death had been avenged not with violence, but with patience and precision, and the refusal to accept that some lies were permanent. Vivian Crace did not approach. Did not need to. She stood at the bottom of the steps and looked up at Wren and placed her hand over her heart. A gesture that crossed the distance between them without words. Nolan's sister acknowledging Spector's daughter. 2 people connected by loss and joined by justice that had taken 22 years to arrive, but had arrived nonetheless. The 3 of them stood on the steps as the sun moved toward the horizon. Thane and Prosper on either side of Wren. The configuration they had maintained since that night in the forest. Triangle formation. Mutual protection. Trust built in darkness and tested under floodlights. And proven in the silence of weekly texts that said all good and meant we are still alive and the cage still holds. What now? Thane asked it the way soldiers ask questions. Simple. Direct. Looking for the next objective because soldiers always look for the next objective. Prosper shrugged. The gesture of a 73-year-old man whose knees hurt and whose back ached and whose heart had been carrying weight for longer than some of those Marines at Quantico had been alive. Go home. Live. Finally stop looking over our shoulders. Wren thought about Juniper, about the kitchen table where they did homework together, about the house that was small and imperfect and exactly enough, about the Marines she would teach tomorrow, and the ones she had taught yesterday, and the ones who would come after. Yeah, she said it quietly. To Thane and Prosper, and to the evening air, and to the memory of a man who had believed his daughter could do what he could not. Live long enough to see justice served. Finally, live. 3 months after the hearing. Arlington National Cemetery. June. The kind of morning where the air smelled like cut grass and history, and the particular silence that exists only in places where the dead are honored by the living. 6 headstones. New, clean white marble that had not yet weathered, arranged in a row beneath an oak tree whose branches spread wide enough to shelter all of them from sun and rain and the passage of time. Colonel Brennan Calloway, Spectre, United States Army Special Forces, 1953 to 2019. Specialist Daniel Kelford, United States Army, 1981 to 2003. Staff Sergeant Leon Whitaker, United States Army, 1974 to 2004. Corporal Hank Pemberton, United States Army, 1972 to 2005. Specialist Nolan Crace, United States Army, 1975 to 2007. And a 6th stone, Sergeant Major Prosper Redmond. Hawk, United States Army, 1951. The death date left blank. Wren had questioned that one. Prosper had insisted, might as well get it ready. Plus, I want to make sure they spell my name right. Prosper is not a common name. People always want to add an extra letter somewhere. Beneath each stone, the same inscription. Chosen by Wren. Approved by every family member. Words that said everything and nothing, and exactly enough. Operation Anaconda, 2002. They found the truth. They protected it. They waited for justice. Some wars take decades. Wren placed flowers at each stone. White roses. Her father's favorite because he said white was the color of things that had not yet been written on. Potential. Possibility. The blank page before the story begins. Juniper stood beside her. 16 years old. Tall for her age. Her grandfather's eyes in a face that was entirely her own. They won. Right, Mom? Wren looked at the stones, at the names of men she had never met, but whose lives she had carried across a forest in the dark. At her father's name carved in marble that would outlast everyone standing here. Some wars take decades, but yeah, they won. Thane appeared, stood beside them without speaking, placed his hand on Danny's headstone, let it rest there. His fingers tracing the carved letters of a name he had been carrying like a wound for 23 years. He did not cry. He did not need to. The stone was enough. The name in marble was enough. The truth spoken aloud in a Senate hearing room and broadcast to millions was enough. Not closure. Closure was a word for people who had not lost someone to murder dressed as accident, but recognition. The world finally acknowledging what had been done and to whom and by whose order. That was enough. Prosper arrived last, moving slowly, his knees worse than 3 months ago, his back protesting every step, but upright, present, alive, which was more than anyone had expected from a 73-year-old man who had spent 22 years running from the same people who had killed his brothers. He looked at his own headstone, read it carefully, nodded, spelled it right. That is all I ask. They stood together as wind moved through the oak tree above them, as sunlight filtered through leaves and cast moving shadows across the stones. As time continued its patient work of carrying everything forward. Loss and justice and memory and the particular silence of a cemetery where people who served their country were given back their names. Wren touched her father's stone, cool marble beneath her fingers. She thought about the basement in West Virginia, where she had cried alone at 2 a.m, about the letter that had started everything, about the calculations that led her through darkness to truth buried in North Carolina soil, about the shot at 2,400 yards that had announced her to the world and set in motion everything that followed. That evening, Wren's house in Richmond, the kitchen table where everything important happened, Juniper doing homework, earbuds in, pencil tapping to a rhythm Ren could not hear. The ordinary choreography of a Tuesday night in a house where extraordinary things had happened and ordinary things had resumed, because that was what living meant. Not the dramatic moments, the quiet ones, the homework and the dinner and the sound of a pencil keeping time with music. Juniper looked up when Ren walked in, pulled out one earbud. How was work good? Taught some Marines that the thing they think is impossible just requires better math. Juniper rolled her eyes, smiling. You sound like Grandpa. The words landed with a weight that Juniper could not know and Ren would not explain. Not today. Someday. When Juniper was old enough to understand that the world contained darkness, and that her mother had walked through it and come out the other side carrying light. I will take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. Juniper went back to her homework, then paused, looked up again. The expression of a 16-year-old working through a question she had been carrying for a while. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Why do you do it? All of it. Teaching, shooting, working so hard. You could just live a normal life. Ren sat across from her daughter, looked at this person she had brought into the world. This bright, fierce girl who wanted to save animals and believed that kindness was stronger than cruelty and had no idea how right she was. Because some things are worth fighting for, and some people are worth remembering. Like Grandpa. Like Grandpa. Juniper considered this, nodded with the seriousness of a young person who understood more than she could articulate, went back to her homework. Ren stood, walked to the window, looked out at the street. Kids playing basketball under a streetlight, a neighbor walking a dog. The ordinary world continuing its ordinary business. Unaware of wars fought in silence. Unaware of truths buried and recovered and spoken aloud in rooms where cameras recorded everything. Later that night, after Juniper had gone to bed, after the house had settled into the quiet that only exists when everyone you love is safe under the same roof, Ren sat in her room, pulled the metal box from her closet, opened it, took out her father's letter, unfolded it for the 1,000th time, read the words that had started everything and ended everything, and meant more now than they had the first time she had read them through tears in a basement, surrounded by rifles and notebooks, and the ghost of pipe tobacco. You are better than I ever was. Do not let anyone tell you different, especially yourself. She folded the letter, placed it back in the box, closed the lid. Tomorrow she would teach more Marines. Next week, she would check in with Thane and Prosper. The trial would begin soon, and the evidence would be presented, and the world would hear what 6 men found in an Afghan valley 22 years ago, and what it cost them and what it meant. But tonight, she would sit in the quiet of a house where her daughter slept, and she would hold the knowledge that her father's death had meant something, that his patience had not been wasted, that the skills he taught her were not just about shooting, but about seeing, about understanding that invisible forces shaped everything, wind and gravity and time and pressure and the particular weight of truth when it has been carried long enough, and far enough, and finally set down in a place where it can do what truth does, which is change everything. Ren turned off the light, lay down, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, she slept without dreaming, because some shots take years to line up, because patience is not passive but the most aggressive form of precision, because a 43-year-old woman who worked 3 jobs and could not make rent had walked into a bar and said 4 words that changed her life. My father shot farther, and then she proved it, and then she proved everything else.